I want to respond to a comment by somebody who appears to be from Thailand, who says compared the Labour MP hitting the constituent 6 times. This is a non-story. Well, not quite. The Labour MP was called Mike Amesbury, and he assaulted a constituent and was then ultimately jailed and released. He was the Labour MP for Runcorn and Helsby. He was filmed repeatedly punching a constituent, Paul Fellows, in Frodsham in Cheshire during a confrontation about a local bridge closure, and the constituent was knocked to the ground and hit at least 5 more times while he was incapacitated, but he wasn't out cold. In January 2025, this year, he pleaded guilty to common assault, and by February, the Deputy Senior District Judge Tan Ikram sentenced him to 10 weeks in prison, requiring him to serve 40% in custody at HMP Alt Course with the remainder on licence. He spent 3 nights in jail, and then on the 27th of February, he appealed, and sitting in Chester Crown Court, the honorary recorder, Judge Stephen Everett, with 2 magistrates, upheld the 10-week sentence but suspended it for 2 years, ordering additional penalties of 200 hours unpaid work, anger management rehabilitation, and a 12-month alcohol monitoring requirement, and this effectively granted him clemency, no further detention beyond his 3 initial nights, and the line which was put out was that he'd learnt his lesson. Now, there's a stark contrast between that and Lucy Connelly, who was the person who made a tweet about from Southport, and she was denied the same sort of clemency. And following the tragic 29th of July Southport stabbings a year ago yesterday, and the ensuing riots, Lucy Connolly, a childminder and the wife of a Conservative local councillor, posted on Twitter calling for mass deportations and explicitly advocating arson at hotels housing asylum seekers, and she falsely blamed asylum seekers for the killings. That was a view which was going around and which was promoted by rather incautious questions that were being put forward by people like Nigel Farage, who was relying on stories which were circulated by Andrew Tate. But, it depends who you rely on, doesn't it? Her post was viewed over 310,000 times before it was deleted. In September 2024, she pleaded guilty to inciting racial hatred, and in October, Judge Melbourne Inman, KC, sentenced her to 31 months imprisonment, of which 40% was to be served in custody, roughly a year, and the remainder on licence. And Connelly attempted to appeal, but in May 2025, the Court of Appeal, led by Lord Justice Holroyd, rejected her appeal, declaring her sentence neither manifestly excessive nor unjust, and denied any reduction or clemency. And yet, at the same time, her lawyers have come up with the same phrase, that she has learned her lesson. Now, on the street and in Reform UK environments, there is a claim that Lucy Connolly is a martyr and is being unjustly punished for, quote, hurty words. Of course, on the principle of riot legislation, inciting a riot is treated very severely in Britain, and always has been. And she's really quite lucky in the sense she doesn't live in Tudor times, because at that point she would almost certainly have merited a death sentence. The concept of a riot is principally governed by the Public Order Act in 1986 now, and under that act a riot is defined as an assembly of 12 or more people where the conduct of the participants taken together is violent and violence causes or is likely to cause serious disturbance. And then there's more recent legislation like the Police Crime and Sentencing and Courts Act of 2022. But the United Kingdom has a long-standing tradition of public protest and assembly. And when these protests escalate into disorder, the legal system is quite clear about the concept of riot. For example, the Riot Act of 1714, the key statute passed during the reign of George I to quell mob violence, particularly during the Jacobite unrest. The Act allowed magistrates to disperse gatherings by reading the Riot Act. Our sovereign lord and king chargeth and commandeth all persons being assembled immediately to disperse themselves, and failure to disperse within an hour allowed the authorities to use force and rioters to be charged with felony. The Riot Act was repealed in 1973, but the phrase reading the Riot Act survives in modern usage. And the common law principles have long permitted the authorities to maintain the peace with ancient powers of dispersal and arrest in extreme cases. And the Crown retains the power to call in the military to assist the police, which is one reason why the magistrates still swear an oath to keep the king's peace. Shakespeare, there's only one piece of writing in Shakespeare's hand, only one speech in Shakespeare's hand, and it's not from the canonical Shakespeare plays. It's from a play called Thomas More, and it's a wonderful piece because it's precisely about this subject, about refugees or migrants who have come into England and are accused of taking people's jobs. And a riot takes place in what is now Trafalgar Square, and Thomas More says, grant them removed, and grant that this your noise hath chid down all the majesty of England. Imagine that you see the wretched strangers, their babies at their backs, and their poor luggage plodding to the ports and coasts for transportation, and that you sit as kings in your desires, authority quite silenced by your brawl, and you in ruff of your opinions clothed. What had you got? I'll tell you. You had taught how insolence and strong hand should prevail, how order should be quelled, and by this pattern not one of you should live an aged man. For other ruffians, as their fancies wrought with self-same hand, self-reasons and self-right, would shark on you, and men like ravenous fishes would feed on one another. So if you take the law into your own hands, and if you hit other people, you are simply breeding violence. And he then says, and the king would command justice, and you would be sentenced to death. But if the king should banish you instead, if the king should treat you with clemency and simply say, okay, you can leave the country, you can be exiled. So now the king should so much come too short of your great trespass as but to banish you, whither would you go? What country, by the nature of your error, should give you harbour? Go you to France or Flanders, to any German province, to Spain or for Portugal? Nay, anywhere that not adheres to England, why, you must needs be strangers. Would you be pleased to find a nation of such barbarous temper that breaking out in hideous violence would not afford you an abode on earth? So, in other words, if you go to France, and the French would say to you, oh, why are you being sent here? Why are you being exiled? You say, well, because I was nasty to foreigners, nasty to French foreigners. Would you receive a good welcome? Of course you wouldn't. And that is the point of the speech. And I think it's a speech which still has resonance today. It's still important today. And this is the stranger's case. And this your mountainish inhumanity. And beautiful language, beautiful humanity exposed by Shakespeare as ever, and the ghastly inhumanity of people who think that a punch or a fist is going to solve all their problems, and of course it doesn't, and that in the end is the problem with Amesbury, and I think it's the question that lies at the heart of the issues surrounding Tommy Robinson. But today we're in a world where we should be able to turn to the police and the authorities for protection. And again, what this story over the last 2 days has shown us is that there is an absence of police presence. And in that time when the police are being called, what do you do? What does anybody do? And that rapid escalation, compounded by misinformation, compounded by ideas about self-defense, leads to violence and leads to insecurity, leads to a feeling that our spaces are not safe. And in a world where in a country where we have so much CCTV, it is madness to conclude, as I think we must, that these public spaces are dangerous. And and equally, it's no excuse to say somebody is drunk. It's no excuse. That isn't an excuse really for Amesbury. It isn't an excuse in the Tommy Robinson story, and it's this response to disorder that we see in the Lucy Connelly story, that we see in the Mike Amesbury story, that we see in this issue with Tommy Robinson and a stranger, simply highlights the fact that we find ourselves in a dangerous, volatile environment where immediacy replaces thought.